My name is Amelia Thornton. For 22 years, my life was woven into the fabric of a company called Crestwood and Hale. I wasn't a founder or an heiress. I was simply a part of its ecosystem, like a sturdy, deep-rooted oak in a familiar forest. My father, a man who spent his life crafting furniture by hand, taught me that the most valuable things are built slowly, with patience and intention. "You don't rush the wood, Amy," he'd say, his voice thick with the scent of sawdust and varnish. "You listen to it. You respect its grain." I carried that lesson with me into the world of corporate textiles, a world that, for a long time, seemed to understand it. I lived in a small, quiet house on the outskirts of Riverbend City, a city that wore its history like a well-loved coat. Cobblestone streets in the old quarter gave way to the sleek glass towers downtown, but the scent of the sea and the damp, loamy earth of the surrounding forests always lingered in the air. My home was my sanctuary, filled with my father's handcrafted tables and chairs, each one a testament to a life of quiet dignity. My garden, a chaotic but joyful explosion of hydrangeas and wild roses, was where I found my peace. At Crestwood and Hale, I was the director of cultural relations. It was a title I'd carved out for myself over 2 decades of nurturing our most important partnership with Miyabi Textiles, a family-run textile dynasty in Kyoto, Japan. It wasn't about translating contracts. It was about translating trust. It was knowing that a gift should never be opened in the presence of the giver, that silence in a negotiation is a sign of consideration, not weakness, and that a relationship built over 20 years is more binding than any legal document. Mr. Sato, the patriarch of Miyabi, and I spoke a language that transcended Japanese or English. It was the language of mutual respect. He reminded me of my father, a man whose word was his bond, whose handshake was a promise. For 22 years, that world was stable. It was a good world, built on quality and human connection. We weren't the fastest-growing company, nor the most aggressive, but we were dependable. We were honorable. And I, in my small, vital way, was the keeper of that honor. I had outlasted market fluctuations, technological revolutions, and 3 different CEOs, each of whom had the wisdom to recognize that some things, like the grain of the wood, should not be rushed or disrespected. And then Jared Nash arrived. There was a chill to his presence, a polished, metallic coldness that seemed to absorb the warmth from every room he entered. Jared Nash, our new CEO, was barely 35, with a smile that was all teeth and no heart, and eyes that saw the world not as a network of people, but as a series of data points to be optimized. His appointment was announced in a glossy, jargon-filled email about synergistic realignment and propelling our legacy into a new era of innovation. I had been at Crestwood and Hale long enough to know that such language was just a pretty wrapper on a box of dynamite. I watched him from the quiet enclave of my office, a comfortable space with a large window overlooking a small city park. It wasn't a corner office in the traditional sense, but it was mine, filled with gifts from Mr. Sato, a delicate ink wash painting, a small ceramic tea set, and photos of my father in his workshop. Jared didn't move through the building like his predecessors. He didn't walk the floors to learn names. He strode through them, a tablet clutched in his hand like a weapon, firing questions that were less about understanding and more about asserting dominance. He interrupted conversations, scanned ID badges with a flicker of dismissive appraisal, and left a wake of nervous silence behind him. During his first week, he held a company-wide town hall. He stood on the small auditorium stage, backlit by a PowerPoint slide that just said "accelerate" and spoke of a future I didn't recognize. He used words like disruption, lean methodology, and frictionless integration. He talked about our history not as a foundation, but as a boat anchor. "We've been doing things the same way for too long," he declared, pacing back and forth. "We've been held back by legacy thinking, by processes that prioritize sentiment over efficiency. From now on, every role, every relationship, every dollar spent will be justified by one thing: data." A few of the younger employees, fresh from business school, nodded enthusiastically. But I saw the looks on the faces of the lifers, the women in accounting who knew every vendor by name, the men in the warehouse who could tell the quality of a fabric by touch alone. They looked like people watching a storm gather over their own homes. I felt a deep, hollow ache in my chest. This wasn't just a change in leadership, it was a change in philosophy. He was trying to stand against the grain. He didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. I was, I suppose, a relic of the old world, a part of the sentiment he was so eager to eliminate. I continued my work, drafting my weekly communique to Mr. Sato, coordinating a shipment of bespoke silk threads, and preparing for his annual visit to Riverbend City. It was a ritual we had honored for 15 years. He and his senior team would come, we would review our joint ventures, share meals, and reaffirm our partnership not just with signatures, but with a shared pot of tea. One afternoon, I passed Jared in the hallway. He was talking animatedly on his phone, something about optimizing the supply chain. He glanced at me, his eyes flicking to my badge. Amelia Thornton, Cultural Relations, it read. A faint, almost imperceptible frown creased his brow before he turned away, already lost again in his world of metrics and speed. He didn't see me. He saw a line item, an inefficiency, a role that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. I returned to my office and closed the door. The scent of the aged wood of my desk, a piece my father had made for me when I got the promotion, filled my senses. I ran my hand over its smooth, familiar surface. It was strong, solid, built to last. It had a soul. Jared Nash, I suspected, would see it as nothing more than an outdated piece of furniture, easily replaced by something flat-packed and modern. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like grief, that he saw me in exactly the same way. The changes came swiftly, like a cold front. First, it was the small things. The artisanal coffee service in the break room was replaced by a sterile, pod-based machine. The flexible work-from-home policy, which had been a godsend for parents and caregivers, was rescinded in favor of maximizing in-person synergy. Then came the people. Robert, the head of quality control, was the first to go. He'd been with the company for 30 years, a gentle, meticulous man who could spot a flawed weave from 10 paces away. He was let go in a 10-minute meeting, his decades of expertise dismissed as redundant. His replacement was a 28-year-old with an MBA and a software suite that promised to do the job for him. The software, of course, couldn't feel the difference between machine-grade cotton and hand-spun linen. It couldn't understand that quality was more than a number. A quiet fear began to permeate the office. People stopped lingering in the hallways. Laughter became muted, conversations whispered. We were all holding our breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. My turn came on a Tuesday. Jared's assistant sent a meeting invitation with no subject line, just a time and a location, Conference Room 3, a small, windowless room used for unpleasant conversations. Clara, the head of HR and a woman I'd shared countless lunches with over the years, was already there when I arrived. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her face was pale, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. Jared strode in a moment later, holding his ever-present tablet. He didn't offer a greeting, just a brisk nod. Amelia, thanks for coming. Please have a seat. I sat, my back straight, my hands resting calmly on the table in front of me. I felt strangely serene, as if I were observing the scene from a great distance. As you know, he began, his voice devoid of any emotion. We're in the process of a comprehensive operational review. We're identifying redundancies and streamlining our workflows to create a more agile, forward-facing organization. He swiped a finger across his tablet. After careful analysis, we've determined that the functions of the Cultural Relations Department can be absorbed by a third-party vendor. We've contracted a translation and logistics firm out of Singapore that uses an AI-powered platform to handle all international communications. It's significantly more cost-effective and scalable. He looked up at me, expecting a reaction. I gave him none. I simply listened. Your role, Amelia, he continued, with a hint of what he probably thought was compassionate finality, is a legacy position. While I'm sure it was valuable in its time, it's no longer aligned with our strategic vision. A legacy position. The phrase hung in the air, cold and sterile. 22 years of building bridges, of fostering trust, of nurturing a partnership that was the bedrock of the company's international success, all of it reduced to a quaint, outdated relic. Clara slid a manila envelope across the table. This is your severance package, Amelia, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It's 4 months' salary, plus your accrued vacation time. Jared smiled his thin, meaningless smile. We believe it's a very generous package. We do appreciate your years of service, of course. I didn't look at the envelope. I looked directly at Jared. Have you informed Mr. Sato of this decision? I asked, my voice even and calm. Jared's smile tightened. We'll be sending out a formal announcement to all our partners later this week, outlining the new, more efficient communication protocols. Our vendor will handle the transition seamlessly. I see, I said softly. I saw it all. I saw his profound, catastrophic ignorance. He didn't understand that the relationship with Miyabi Textiles wasn't a protocol to be optimized. It was a garden that had been tended for a generation. And he had just handed the pruning shears to a machine. I stood up, pushing my chair in neatly. I looked at Clara, whose eyes were now shimmering with unshed tears, and gave her the smallest, saddest of smiles. Then I turned my gaze back to Jared. I wish you the best of luck with your new strategic vision, Jared, I said. The words were polite, but they felt like stones in my mouth. Thank you, Amelia, he said, already looking back at his tablet, dismissing me from his mind as easily as he dismissed me from my job. Best of luck to you as well. I walked out of that room without looking back. I moved through the office, a ghost in a place that had been my professional home for more than half my life. A few colleagues saw me, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. They averted their eyes, pretending to be busy, and I couldn't blame them. Survival is a powerful instinct. When I got back to my office, the reality of it finally began to sink in. I looked at the inkwash painting, at the photos of my father, at the worn spot on the carpet where my chair had rolled back and forth for thousands of days. A wave of grief, so sharp and sudden it stole my breath, washed over me. It wasn't just the loss of a job. It was the violation of a principle. It was the desecration of something carefully and lovingly built. I packed my personal belongings into a small box, my movements slow and deliberate. As I took down the painting from the wall, my fingers traced the delicate brushstrokes. Mr. Sato had given it to me on my 10th anniversary with the company. For a decade of harmony, the inscription read. I left the building and stepped out into the crisp autumn air of Riverbend City. The sun was bright, the sky a piercing blue. The world was going on, indifferent to the small death that had just occurred in a windowless room on the 5th floor. I drove home, the box of my life on the passenger seat, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't know what I would be doing tomorrow. The feeling was equal parts terrifying and, to my surprise, liberating. The oak had been uprooted, but the roots were still intact. They just needed to find new soil. The first few days were a blur of quiet disorientation. The rhythm of my life, so predictable for so long, was gone. There was no morning commute, no emails to answer, no calls to make. The silence in my house was immense. I spent hours in my garden, pulling weeds with a vengeance, my hands deep in the cool, dark earth. The physical work was grounding, a way to channel the roiling emotions inside me, the anger, the hurt, and the profound sadness. My father's voice echoed in my mind. Sometimes, Amy, you have to plane a piece of wood all the way down to find its true character. The part that's been hidden. I felt like that piece of wood stripped bare, raw, exposed. What was my true character without the title, without the company? On the 3rd day, Clara called. I'm so sorry, Amelia, she whispered, her voice thick with guilt. I wanted to say more. I wanted to fight for you, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept talking about ROI and KPIs. It's not your fault, Clara, I said, and I meant it. She was just another person trying to survive in the new, cold climate. He sent the email, she said. The announcement to the partners. It was awful. So corporate, so impersonal. It said you had moved on to pursue other opportunities and that all future communications would be routed through a new automated portal. She paused. He's running the company like an algorithm. He doesn't understand that our biggest asset was never the textiles. It was the trust. We spoke for a little longer, and she told me the mood in the office was grim. More people were being let go. The new software was causing chaos in the warehouse. The soul of the place was flickering out. After we hung up, I sat at my father's old writing desk and pulled out a piece of fine, cream-colored stationery. With my best fountain pen, I wrote a letter. Not an email, not a text, but a proper letter. Dear Mr. Sato, I began, writing in my most careful, respectful Japanese script. I told him what had happened, simply and without embellishment. I explained that my departure was not my choice, and that I deeply regretted any disruption it might cause to the harmony we had so carefully cultivated. I did not ask for anything. I did not complain about Jared or the company. I simply stated the truth, as one respected friend to another. It was a letter of farewell, a final act of closing our shared chapter with the dignity it deserved. I sealed it, stamped it, and walked to the post office to send it on its long journey to Kyoto. That act, more than anything else, felt like a turning point. It was an affirmation of my own value, a refusal to be erased. I had been dismissed, but I would not be dishonored. A week later, an email landed in my inbox. The sender was a name I vaguely recognized from an industry conference years ago, a woman named Helen Croft, a partner at a consulting firm called Apex Meridian Group. The subject line was, "A conversation?" Curious, I opened it. Helen wrote that she had heard through the grapevine that I was no longer with Crestwood and Hale. She said my reputation for navigating the delicate complexities of Japanese-American business partnerships was legendary. Apex was expanding its Asian markets division and was looking for a senior leader. "We don't believe in AI-powered relationships," she wrote. "We believe in people. Would you be open to a chat?" I read the email 3 times. It felt like a lifeline, a sign that the world still had a place for the things I believed in. I wrote back and agreed to a meeting. The Apex Meridian Group offices were in the newest, most beautiful tower in Riverbend City, with panoramic views of the harbor. But unlike the cold austerity of Jared's redesigned floors, this space was warm and inviting. Natural light streamed in through floor-to-ceiling windows. The walls were adorned with vibrant art, and the air buzzed with a quiet, collaborative energy. Helen Croft was a woman in her late 60s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She didn't ask me why I left my old job. She asked me what I was passionate about. She didn't talk about cost-cutting. She talked about building sustainable, long-term value. We spoke for 2 hours, not as if it were an interview, but as if we were 2 old friends discovering a shared philosophy. "We don't just want a consultant, Amelia," she said as our meeting drew to a close. "We want a leader. We want someone to build our bridge to Japan and to do it the right way. With respect, with patience, with heart." I left her office feeling lighter than I had in years. That evening, a formal offer arrived. It was for a position as Vice President of International Partnerships. The salary was substantially higher, the responsibilities greater, and the title came with a promise of autonomy and respect that I realized I had been starved of for months. I sat in my garden as the sun set, a mug of tea warming my hands. I thought about the broken rhythm of my life, and how, slowly, a new one was beginning to form. I accepted the offer the next morning. I was no longer Amelia Thornton, the legacy employee from Crestwood and Hale. I was Amelia Thornton, and I was just getting started. My first week at Apex Meridian Group was like stepping into a different world. It was a world where my experience was not a liability but an asset, where my opinions were sought and valued. My new office was spacious and bright, and my team was a small, dedicated group of professionals who were eager to learn from me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of purpose that was invigorating, not just comforting. Meanwhile, back at Crestwood and Hale, the storm I had seen gathering on the horizon finally broke. The annual visit from Mr. Sato and his delegation was scheduled for the following week, a fact I was sure Jared had either forgotten or underestimated. On the Monday of their visit, Clara texted me. "It's a disaster, Amelia. They're here." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I pictured the scene, Mr. Sato, a man of profound dignity and tradition, arriving with his customary gifts, expecting to be greeted with the warmth and respect of a two-decade friendship. And he would be met, instead, by Jared Nash. I called Clara during my lunch break. "Tell me everything," I said. Her voice was strained. Jared met them in the lobby. He didn't bow. He shook Mr. Sato's hand a little too hard and clapped him on the shoulder. He kept calling him Sato-san, but in that breezy way that Americans use, like it's just a formality. Then he launched straight into a presentation on his tablet about the new automated communications portal. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene with painful clarity. The cultural missteps were a minefield. The lack of a formal greeting, the physical overfamiliarity, the immediate pivot to impersonal business and technology, it was a symphony of disrespect. And then, Clara continued, her voice dropping. Mr. Sato stopped him. He just held up a hand. The whole room went silent. He spoke in Japanese, and Jared had to wait for one of the junior delegates to translate. The translator looked horrified. "What did he say, Clara?" He said, "We are here to see our friend, Amelia Thornton." "Where is she?" My heart ached. Even now, he was looking for me. "Jared got this flustered look on his face," Clara said. "He stammered something about how you'd moved on and that the new system was far more efficient. And that's when it happened, Amelia." Mr. Sato stood up. His face was like stone. He spoke again in Japanese, and this time, he didn't wait for a translation. He and his entire team just bowed stiffly, turned around, and walked out of the room. Silence hung on the line. What was the translation? I finally asked, though I already knew. Clara took a shaky breath. The junior delegate told Jared afterward. He said, "Mr. Sato says that a house without a foundation cannot stand. This partnership was built on the foundation of a personal trust that you have demolished. There is nothing left to discuss. They left the building, Amelia. They're gone." The financial implications were staggering. The Miyabi Textiles contract was worth over $30 million annually, but it was more than that. It was the cornerstone of Crestwood and Hale's reputation. Without it, they weren't just poorer. They were diminished. News of the debacle spread through the company like a virus. The board called an emergency meeting. Investors started asking pointed questions. Jared, in a desperate attempt at damage control, tried to spin the narrative. I heard from another former colleague that he was telling people the Japanese were too rigid and resistant to modernization. Then, the story twisted again. He started blaming me. "He's telling the board you mismanaged the relationship for years," Clara told me on another call. "That you made yourself an unnecessary bottleneck, and that your sudden departure sabotaged the transition. He's painting you as this bitter, obsolete employee who couldn't handle change." I listened, a cold, clear calm settling over me. The lies didn't hurt me anymore. They were the desperate flailings of a man drowning in the consequences of his own arrogance. He had tried to erase my value, and when that failed, he tried to rewrite my history. And that's when I knew this wasn't over. My own peace was settled. I had a new job, a new future. But my honor and the honor of the relationship I had built had been publicly tarnished. Setting the record straight was no longer a matter of pride. It was a matter of principle. 2 days later, my new assistant buzzed my line. "Miss Thornton?" Mr. Jared Nash is on the phone for you. He says it's urgent." I took a deep breath, leaned back in my chair, and looked out at the peaceful harbor. "Put him through," I said. The voice on the other end was stripped of its usual bravado. It was thin, strained. "Amelia? It's Jared." I was hoping we could talk. I let the silence stretch for a moment. "About what, Jared?" "Look, there's been a misunderstanding with the Miyabi account," he said, the words catching in his throat. "A cultural disconnect." I was thinking, maybe you could help. On a consulting basis, of course. Just to smooth things over. Your familiarity with them could be valuable. Valuable. The word was so ironic it was almost painful. He wasn't offering an apology. He was offering a transaction. He didn't want to fix his mistake. He just wanted me to clean up his mess, quietly, from the sidelines, so he could save face. He wanted the benefit of my work without acknowledging its worth. A month ago, I might have felt a flare of anger, a desire for revenge. But sitting there in my new office, surrounded by a culture of respect, I felt something else. Power. The quiet, steady power of a woman who knew her worth. "I'm very busy, Jared," I said calmly. "But I'm willing to have a conversation." I paused, letting him absorb the shift in our dynamic. "My office. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. He agreed immediately, his relief palpable through the phone. After I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a deep, resonant resolve. This wasn't about destroying him. This was about teaching him the true meaning of the word he had so carelessly used against me. This was about legacy. Not his, but mine. Jared arrived at the Apex Meridian Group offices at 9:05, just late enough to signal that he was still trying to project an air of importance, but just punctual enough to betray his desperation. He looked diminished in the bright, open lobby, his expensive suit seeming less like a symbol of power and more like a costume. The confident stride was gone, replaced by a tense, hurried walk. My assistant showed him into a glass-walled conference room that overlooked the city. I had chosen it specifically. I wanted him to see the expansive view, to feel the quiet confidence of this place, a world he couldn't touch, a world he had so foolishly cast me into. I let him wait for 2 minutes before I entered, carrying nothing but a slim leather portfolio. I wore a simple navy dress, my posture poised and my expression serene. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted, and we both knew it. "Jared," I said, my voice pleasant as I gestured to a chair. "Thank you for coming." He managed a tight, nervous smile. "Amelia, this is a nice place you have here." He launched immediately into his pitch, a clumsy, rambling monologue about re-engaging key partners and rebuilding bridges. He never once used the word I. It was always we who had made a misstep, the company that needed to correct course. He spoke of the Miyabi contract as a purely financial problem, a significant asset that needed to be recovered. He never mentioned honor, or friendship, or 22 years of trust. He finished, spreading his hands on the polished table as if in supplication. "So, I'm proposing a short-term consulting agreement. You help us draft some communications, maybe get on a call with Sato, explain the situation. We'll compensate you very generously for your time." I listened patiently until he was done. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. "You're asking me to repair a relationship that you broke," I said, my voice soft but clear as glass. "And you're asking me to do it after you told your board that I was the one who mismanaged it. After you called me a bottleneck. After you dismissed my life's work as a legacy position." The color drained from his face. He stammered, That was just internal positioning, Amelia. Business is business. You know how it is." "I do," I said, and for the first time I allowed a small, cool smile to touch my lips. "I know exactly how it is. And that is why I cannot accept your offer." He stared at me, dumbfounded. "What?" "But you said you'd meet." "I thought. I met with you to give you this," I said. I opened my portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward him. It was a press release draft from Apex Meridian Group. The headline was simple: Apex Meridian Group welcomes Amelia Thornton as VP to lead new Japanese-American partnership division. He scanned the first paragraph, which detailed my extensive experience and long-standing relationships in the Japanese textile industry. Then his eyes fell on the second paragraph. Ms. Thornton's first initiative will be to formalize a new, exclusive strategic alliance with esteemed Kyoto firm Miyabi Textiles, a partnership built on decades of mutual respect and trust. Jared looked up from the paper, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. You wanted them? You stole them. No, Jared, I said, my voice gentle now, almost pitying. I didn't have to go to them. After you so publicly demonstrated your company's values, Mr. Sato contacted me. He wanted to know if the principles we had built our friendship on, respect, patience, honor, could find a new home. I was happy to tell him they could. He was speechless. The architect of disruption, the champion of emotionless efficiency, was undone by the very human connections he had deemed worthless. I didn't do this to hurt you, Jared, I continued, speaking the honest truth as I felt it. Your company is failing because of the choices you made. You chose to value spreadsheets over people. You chose to sever ties you didn't understand. You chose to believe that experience was disposable. I stood up, my movement signaling the end of our conversation. This isn't revenge. This is a consequence. It is the natural result of sanding against the grain. Eventually, the wood splinters. He remained seated, staring at the press release as if it were a death warrant. He looked small, lost, a boy who had broken a priceless heirloom and had no idea how to fix it. I wish you luck, Jared, I said, walking toward the door. And in that moment, I truly did. I wished him the luck to one day learn the lesson he had been so brutally taught. I walked out of the conference room and didn't look back. I returned to my bright, sunlit office, to a team that valued me, to a future I was building on my own terms. The next day, Apex Meridian Group issued the press release. The news rippled through the industry. Within a month, Crestwood and Hale's stock had plummeted. The board removed Jared Nash as CEO, citing a catastrophic loss of investor confidence. The company was eventually sold for parts, its legacy of quality and honor dismantled piece by piece. I never rejoiced in its failure. I only mourned what it had once been. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit in my garden, the lights of Riverbend City twinkling in the distance, and I think about the winding path that brought me here. I think about my father, his hands covered in sawdust, and his belief in respecting the materials you work with. I learned that lesson applies to more than just wood. It applies to relationships, to careers, to people. My story is not one of revenge, but of reclamation. It is the story of a woman who was told she was obsolete, only to discover that her deepest values were, in fact, timeless. And in the quiet hum of my new life, I have found a peace that is stronger than any corporate tower, a foundation that can never be broken. I found my own grain, and I learned to honor it.